Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bhardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bhardhari Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnu Paramahamsa Parivraja Kacharya Sto Tarasat Srimad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Sri Caitanya Caritamrita Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktarinda Sri Caitanya Caritamrita Adi Lila chapter 10, verse number 19. The span of verses was 18, 19, and 20. So 19 has a purport, then we'll read 18, 19, and 20. Dasha Sahasra Gandhava More Deha Chandra Mukha Tara Gaya Muni Nakon Tabe Mora Shuka Taragaya munina kontave mora shuka. It's best to slow down a little. It's not a race. Always amazes me in temples how everything becomes, when we're doing prayers or anything, it becomes like a race. The lotus feet of our spiritual master on where which we contain. These are beautiful words. We just let them have a bit of air. Dasa sahasra gandhava more deha chandra mukha. Taragaya muni nakon tave mora shuka. Dasa sahasra, 10,000. Gandhava, residents of the Gandhava Loka. More, unto me. Deha, please deliver. Chandramukha, O moon-faced one. Taragaya, let them sing. Muni nakon, let me dance. Tabe, then. Mora, my. Shuka, happiness. Translation, O Chandramukha, please give me 10,000 Gandhavas. Let them sing as I dance, and then I will be greatly happy. O Chandramukha, please give me 10,000 Gandhavas. Let them sing as I dance, and then I will be greatly happy. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Gandhavas, who are residents of the Gandhava Loka, are celebrated as celestial singers. I wonder what that sounds like. Celestial singing. Whenever singing is needed in the celestial planets, the Gandhavas are invited to sing. The Gandhavas can sing continuously for days, and therefore Vakreshwara Pandit wanted to dance as they sang. That's the purport. So I was given 18, 19 and 20. So 18 has no purport and 20 has no purport. But the three verses are: Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu personally sang while Vakreshwara Pandit danced, and thus Vakreshwara Pandit fell at the lotus feet of the Lord and spoke as follows: O Chandramukha, please give me 10,000 Gandhavas. Let me sing as I dance, and then I will be greatly happy. Lord Chaitanya replied, I have only one wing like you, but if I had another, certainly I would fly in the sky. Umakinati mirandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshurun militam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Caitanya manobhistam stapitam jena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam tadati swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Vitanscha. Hey Krishna, Karuna Sindhu, Dina Bandho, Jagatpate, Gopesha Gopika Kanta, Radha Kanta, Namostute. Tapta Kanchana, Gourangi, Radhe, Vrindavaneshwari, Vrishabhanu, Sute Devi, Pranamami, Haripriye. Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha, Kripa Sindho Vevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha. So in Gauraganadesha Deepika, as it explains in verse number 17, in verse 71 of Gauraganadesha Deepika, it is stated that Vakreshwara Pandit was an incarnation of Aniruddha, one of the quadruple expansions of Vishnu: Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna. He could dance wonderfully for 72 hours continuously. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu played in dramatic performances in the house of Srivas Pandit, Vakreshwara Pandit was one of the chief dancers, and he danced continually for that length of time. Sri Govinda Das, an Oriya devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, has described the life of Vakreshwara Pandit in his book Gaura Krishnodaya. There are many disciples of Vakreshwara Pandit in Orissa, and they are known as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, although they are Oriens. Among these disciples are Sri Gopal Guru and his disciple Jana Chandra Goswami. So Aniruddha, from the Chatuvyuha, Aniruddha. Niruddha means held in check, held back, suppressed. So Aniruddha means the exact opposite of that. Irrepressible, unchecked. Now we understand actually that the Chatuvyuha come from Lord Balaram originally, or it's a couple of steps. Krishna expands himself as Lord Balaram. Actually, in an earlier chapter 5, on the glories of Lord Nityananda, Srila Prabhupada uses the phrase that Lord Balaram is Krishna's second body, and there is no difference. Of course, the mood is different. Lord Krishna exists to be served, and Lord Balaram exists to serve. And Lord Balaram actually, by his different expansions and incarnations, appears and takes part in all of Krishna's leelas. He serves the Lord in all his leelas. So Lord Balaram expands the first Chatuvyuha of Aniruddha, Vasudeva, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, and Sankarshan. And from the Sankarshan, the second Sankarshan, Mahasankirtan comes, and from Mahasankirtan comes Lord Narayan, and from Lord Narayan come all the Vishnu forms, and three of those Vishnu forms take care of the material world. And then within the Kali Yuga, Lord Balaram appears as Lord Nityananda. But we see here he's also appearing through his plenary portion of Aniruddha as Vakreshwara Pandit. And although Prabhupada doesn't comment on the verse, when Lord Chaitanya says, I have only one wing like you, but if I had another, certainly I would fly in the sky. In that sense, he's referring to the identity of Lord Balaram. There is only one Lord Balaram, but of course, just he's unlimitedly expanded in so many ways. And in this, so what is being revealed here obliquely is a very intimate, very, very intimate relationship. Lord Chaitanya had a very close and intimate relationship with Vakreshwara Pandit. And as Prabhupada says in the purport here, if you can get a hold of the book by Sri Govindadas called Gaura Krishnodaya, the full life of Vakreshwara Pandit is described in that book. But one aspect of the intimacy of the relationship between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Vakreshwara Pandit is something I'd like to talk about today. I was looking a little bit up yesterday in those thumbnail histories of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that are in the ISKCON Desire Tree, Gaudiya histories. Vakreshwara Pandit, the very, as we see, intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya. And that led to the actual deliverance of a devotee called Devananda Pandit. Devananda Pandit was a Smarta Brahmin in Navadvip. Smarta Brahmanism, actually Smarta Brahmanism still exists. The idea of the Smarta Brahmins is actually contrary to Shastra about their position, because Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, Chaturvanyam Maya Shrishtam Guna Kama Vibhagasha. The Varnashram system is constituted on the basis of what one's position is in relationship to guna and karma. In other words, where one is situated within the three modes of material nature as a result of one's karma. That can lead to an interesting kind of paradox, because the Smarta Brahmins say that you are only a Brahmin if you are born in the family of a Brahmin. And in one sense, in a properly regulated society, that would probably be true, that you would have the guna and karma of a Brahmin if you were born in the family of a Brahmin. This is called breeding. But, you know, in today's world, the only real concern for breeding is cows and dogs and cats and horses. You can look up, if you, especially, well, not just especially, but if you go to like a horse auction, they'll bring it out of colt for auction, and they'll give the pedigree of this thing. It's, you know, it's sired by so and so in such and such a mare and then they'll go back generations. And anyone who understands the performance of those horses, if like you're in the business of buying racehorses, people who do this, they know the pedigrees, and they know therefore the genes are passed down, the disposition, predisposition to do something is there. And then of course the same thing applies in plants. The whole thing of what is it called? GMOs. genetically modified organisms. Well, actually, genetically modifying an organism is called breeding, or genetically controlling, breeding for a particular purpose, to create a particular purpose. It's very standard. It's not weird. The whole thing with GMOs is it's very weird because of all the kind of very strange goals and the very strange means by which that end is reached. But in the world, breeding up until our present age has always been a very important thing. So it's not surprising that if you're born in a properly regulated varnashram society, if you're born into a Brahmin family or a Kshatriya family or a Shudra family or a Vaishya family, it's because actually you have that disposition. You have the disposition to the kind of work which is prescribed for that Varna. However, there's the old question of nurture and nature. So you may have a particular nature, but if you're not nurtured properly or you're exposed to the wrong things, then you can lose it all, just as we see later on in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 6th canto. The whole story of Ajamil is based upon that principle, that he was a very Paka Brahmin, and he was practicing very carefully, but he got perverted. And then, as they say, he went down the rabbit hole. But what has happened, for whatever reason, is that the Varnashram system, especially, well, actually, as they say, the fish rots from the head. So there's a long tail to this, but the idea of Smarta Brahmanism is that unless you are born in the family of a Brahmin, you are not a Brahmin, and you can never become a Brahmin. And Lord Caitanya was particularly against that. As we see when he went to Varanasi, he stayed in the house of Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar was a Shudra. He could have stayed in so many other places, but he went deliberately and stayed in the house of a Shudra, because Chandrasekhar was a first-class devotee. So it doesn't matter. Lord Caitanya is asked by, well, what, aren't you supposed to be a sannyasi? And then he explains how, well, I'm not a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, or sannyasi. I am simply the servant of the servant of the servant of the self-manifesting master of the gopis, Lord Sri Krishna. So Devananda Pandit was a smarter Brahmin, but he was a highly learned. We should not underestimate these things. Brahmins, Paka Brahmins, thoroughgoing Brahmins, are very learned, very much dedicated to the study of Shastra. And Devananda Pandit was particularly devoted to, let's say devoted to Srimad Bhagavatam. And one time Srinivasacharya went to a reading and a dissertation by Devananda Pandit on the Bhagavatam, and at one point he became overwhelmed with ecstasy at hearing the Bhagavatam, and he began to cry. And Devananda Pandit's disciples thought, who's this guy disrupting this discourse? And they ushered him out. They ushered him out. And the point was, Devananda Pandit did nothing about that. He did nothing about that. So that was a very great offense. This is the problem with the Smarta Brahmins, is they are so much actually proud of their learning, proud of their position, and especially, well, Prabhupada always used to say, intelligent people are always proud of their intelligence. That tendency to be proud is a real problem in life for anyone, but especially it's a problem for us as aspiring devotees. Devamrita Swami was talking about that the other day when he was mentioning about humility and pridelessness, and how when he was on the verse about the Buddha, and he was talking about, because the Buddha propagates ahimsa, but actually before ahimsa, before non-violence, comes humility and pridelessness. This is from the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the verses 8 to 12. Krishna lists 20 items, and he says, all these things are knowledge, and all else is ignorance. And the first two, the first one is humility, then pridelessness. And actually, they're two sides of the one coin. You can't have humility and pride mixed. They can't be there together. Humility, in essence, is complete pridelessness, complete absence of pride. You can't be proud of your humility, and you can't be very humble about your pride. Not possible. So humility and pridelessness, or the lack of those things, tends to manifest in people whose intelligence is absorbed in the acquisition of knowledge for the power it gives you over others, for the prestige that it gives you in society. And these are the kind of people Krishna is talking about when he says, Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapajate vasudeva sarvamati samahatma sudurlabha. It's very difficult to find a person who has transcended the path of jnana, a person who actually becomes jnanavan. Jnanavan, just like Bhagavan or Shraddhavan, is when one actually comes to the end of knowledge, Vedanta, then he comes to the understanding, Vasudeva Savamiti. Everything is Vasudeva. And in one lecture, when Prabhupada quotes that verse, he says, in the first instance, he's puzzled. You mean a person? Because jnana is actually concerned with the energies. The energies. So you can study Srimad Bhagavatam and not understand who Krishna is, who Krishna actually is. Avajanti mam mura manushim taram ashritam param bhavam achananto mama bhuta maheshwaram mogasa mogakamana moga jnana vichetasa. Moga means destroyed, lost. And so these two verses, Krishna says, are fools to ride me when I descend in the human form. And therefore all of their endeavors, mogasa, moga kamana, moga jnana vichetasa, all their endeavors for the results of fruitive activities, jnana or liberation, are all destroyed, and they actually take shelter of demoniac ideas. So the understanding that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of the Lord is actually not there, not fully there in the Smarta Brahmin community. When Srila Prabhupada installed Krishna Balaram, Radhesham, Gaurnitai and Vrindavan, he made it clear that there should be kirtan going on the whole time while the Brahmins were doing all the installation rituals, because he said We have to do these rituals to satisfy these people. But if there's no kirtan, it's useless. And indeed, kirtan is enough. If you see, I love the footage of Srila Prabhupada installing Radha Parasishwara. That temple was just like a sliver building. It wasn't very big, very narrow and small and tight. You can see it when all the devotees are cramped in there. And there they've got Radha Parasishwara standing in a couple of big cooking pots. And with a cooking ladle, and Prabhupada's just pouring a bit of milk over them while everybody's chanting Hare Krishna. Very simple, very simple. Actually, Srila Prabhupada once said to my godbrother Tribhuvanath, Tribhuvanath tells the story of how he was, it was in Edinburgh. You were there, sir, in Edinburgh. Prabhupada visited there, and Tribhuvanath was in charge of the project. And he went into Srila Prabhupada's room one day to talk with him, and Prabhupada was chanting japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And Tribhuvanath came in, offered his obeisances, came and sat down in front of Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada just kept chanting for a little while. And then he stopped and he kind of looked at his beads and looked at Tribhuvanath, and he said, "This Krishna consciousness is so simple, you can miss it. You can miss it. You can miss it. It is so simple." And at the simple core of it is what is being demonstrated here. This, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his intimate relationships with his devotees. Intimate, loving relationships with his devotees. So, Devananda Pandit, actually puffed up with his mundane understanding of things, didn't recognize who Srinivasacharya was. He didn't recognize the person Bhagavat. He's here reciting Bhagavat and teaching all his scholars, all his students, all the correct meter and so forth of how to chant all these verses. That is all external. And he didn't recognize that this person is fully immersed in Bhagavatam. This person is a walking Bhagavatam. This person is a Bhagavata. The book Bhagavata and the person Bhagavata are to be seen equally. And so he committed a very great offense as a result of that. And there's a very nice, that kind of leads me, that's a long introduction to get what I wanted to talk about. Where he became relieved of his offense actually by his inadvertent attraction to and appreciation of Vakvashvara Pandit. Because Vakvashvara Pandit would be all over Navadvip, going to kirtan programs and singing and dancing and putting everybody in ecstasy. And Devananda Pandit happened to go along to a program where he was there, and he was very attracted and impressed by Vakvashvara Pandit. And of course, news of that got back to Lord Caitanya, and Lord Caitanya, as a result of that, relieved Devananda Pandit of his offense. But then Lord Caitanya had this to say, and this is from the Chaitanya Bhagavat. Also, we're recommended to read that, because there's a lot of crossover and interconnection between Chaitanya Bhagavat, Chaitanya Mangal, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. And indeed, we see many times where Krishnadas Kaviraj says, "I could say more about this, but it's very much elaborated in the Chaitanya Bhagavat." And Prabhupada is always saying, read the Chaitanya Bhagavat. So this is what Lord Chaitanya says about aparad, about blasphemy, the particular aparad of blasphemy. Listen, Brahman. He's talking to Devananda. Listen, Brahman. If someone eats poison, then he must take ambrosia through the very same mouth. Then the poison will be digested and the body will become immortal by the power of the divine ambrosia. Now, let me answer your question. Whatever blasphemies you have unknowingly made are exactly like poison which you have eaten. Now you must use the same mouth to constantly glorify Krishna's name and qualities, which are like ambrosia. You have used this mouth to insult the devotees. Now use it to glorify them. Glorify the devotees as the best of humanity. Glorify them in songs and poetry. I will destroy all the poison of blasphemy through the ambrosia of the ecstasies of Krishna's glories. You have all unknowingly committed offenses. This is the truth. If you should stop all kinds of offensive activity and simply engage in praising Krishna and his devotees, then you will be free from all the sins you have committed, however numerous they may be. You will not be able to achieve the same results by millions of atonements. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur comments, an offensive person will only attain auspiciousness. Excuse me. And an offensive person will only attain auspiciousness if he uses the mouth through which he made his blasphemy and his blasphemous comments to acknowledge his offense and to glorify Krishna and his devotees. If you take poison, it will disrupt the body's functioning, but you can remedy the situation by taking a medicine that destroys its effects. Similarly, the way to become free from the poisonous effects of Vaishnav Ninda is to first of all stop. Stop it! Just stop it. That is a very hard thing to do, actually. We have to recognize where we're coming from. The influence of envy, which is the root disease of the conditioned soul, and the momentum of that envious nature in terms of our thoughts, words and deeds, is something that lingers with us for a very long time. Envy is insidious. It hides, it masquerades, it presents itself. Like there's a book, David Copperfield, if anybody ever read Charles Dickens. There's a character, there's this, at the core, at the center of David Copperfield, there's this romantic development between David Copperfield and this beautiful young lady. But there's a character in the book called Uriah Heep. Charles Dickens was very good at coming up with these kind of Uriah Heep, you know, the dunghill. And he was also very, very attracted to this girl, but he came from a social class where, oh, actually both of them, David Copperfield and Uriah Heep, they both came from a social class where they were never going to get the girl. But Uriah Heep was very envious, and he was always presenting himself saying, "Oh, I'm a very humble man, sir," like this. But he was a very, very envious person, masquerading in one way or another. So envy's a horrible thing. Horrible thing. Envy is like a cocktail. It's a cocktail of lust and anger and greed and maybe a few other things, shaken not stirred. Envy, shake it up. I remember years ago, before well, this is probably 50 years ago now. 50 years ago. There was a movie called Bedazzled, where it was a Peter Cook and Dudley Moore movie, where Peter Cook played the devil, and Dudley Moore played this hapless little fellow working in a fast food cafe in Soho in London, and he was completely infatuated with one of the waitresses, and the devil appears and says, I can get you the girl, you just do what I want you to do, or you just... So he enters into a pact with the devil, and through that he meets the personification of the 7 deadly sins. Of course, in Christian theology, envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. And what's his name? Dame Edna, what's his name? Barry Humphries plays envy, and at one point he stumbles into Envy's boudoir, little hapless character. He finds himself in Envy's boudoir, and everything in the place is different shades of green. Different shades of green. And Barry Humphries is sitting there in like a green kimono, and he's got a green Sobrani cigarette, and he's talking about he's envious of all the others. He's envious of lust and greed, and he's envious of everything. and Shakespeare, in Othello, there's a line that says, I'll probably get this wrong, but beware the green-eyed monster that doth mock the flesh upon which she doth feed. The green-eyed monster of jealousy. Beware. She doth mock the very flesh upon which she doth feed. Envy is such a, as I said, insidious thing, pervasive. And it's the basic contamination to our consciousness. It is our envy of Krishna which has brought us into the material world, and all the entanglement that comes, we go down the rabbit hole, or the infinite numbers of rabbit holes that constitute the material world. We're here because we become envious of Krishna. Ichcha dvesha samuttena dvandva mohena bharata savayanti samoham samoham savabhutani samoham sagayanti parantapa. They're all living beings, are born into delusion in this material world, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. And again, in one lecture, Srila Prabhupada, when he quotes that verse, and he says the original desire is to be Krishna, and the original hatred is of Krishna. And Krishna is Krishna means Krishna and his devotees. So overcoming this envy, there's only one way. There's only one way. As this is the poison. This envy is the poison. This is the original poison that we eat, that we swallow, that therefore contaminates our consciousness. And the only solution to this, the only way, just like Srila Prabhupada talks about, the only way you can get rid of jaundice is by eating sugar candy, which in the beginning tastes bitter, but then the sweetness comes. It's the sugar candy which neutralizes the bile that comes, and then as that happens, we begin to taste the sweetness. There's an Indraduma Swami story about how he said that he was in Pipli buying some tents, Pipli tents, for his festival program. And he was walking down the street and he hears this chant, "Cobra, cobra, cobra." And this crowd of people appears and they've got a man who's been bitten by a cobra. And they're taking him to, I guess you'd call him a shaman. He's a Brahmin shaman. A shaman Brahmin, there you go. Who you can neutralize the effect of snakebite with mantras. So they took him to this man, and this man was chanting the mantras and fanning him with a peacock feather fan and feeding him neem leaves. And the man was still conscious, but he was kind of delirious, and so they're just putting the neem leaves in his mouth, saying, "Chew it, chew it, chew it." And he's chewing and chewing and chewing, and the man's chanting the mantras, and he's saying, "How does it taste? How does it taste?" And you know, we all know the bitterness of neem leaves. And the man's saying, "Sweet, sweet, sweet." So the virulence of the cobra's venom is so great upon the organism of this man's body that the most bitter thing you can think of was tasting sweet. So it may be very difficult to turn oneself around and actually give up all feelings of envy and animosity, especially towards other devotees. But the only solution is to glorify them. Glorify them. All devotees. In other words, I mean, I always thank my mother for this. She always used to say to me, if you can't say anything good about somebody, don't say anything at all. Actually, there you have it. There's a very good rule of thumb. You might think something, you might feel something. That's all right. In the Kali Yuga, there's no offense. Stuff that passes through your mind. My God, what passes through your mind? But if you don't give voice to it, there's no offense. There's no offense. But as soon as you latch onto that and say something, then you're entangled in offense. I mean, let's look at offense, the word offense, for a little bit. What does it really mean? What does it mean to offend somebody? Any ideas? What does it mean? Nailed it. In what? You hurt someone's feelings. And at the center of all of this, whose feelings actually get hurt? It's Krishna's feelings that are getting hurt. There is no difference between the Lord and the holy name. So if you offend the holy name, you offend the Lord. What's that mean? You're hurting his feelings. You're hurting his feelings. So you hurt the feelings of the devotees, you hurt the feelings of the Lord. So what happens? What happens actually? Look at it naturally. You think, well, don't worry about punishment. Just think about what happens when you've got hurt feelings. Somebody hurts your feelings, right? So like here, you say you go to a social gathering and somebody's done something either knowingly or unknowingly and they've hurt your feelings. You have hurt feelings. Ladies are very, very au fait with this. Hurt feelings. And men tend to feelings. Hurt feelings. So then you go to a social event and ever since your feelings got hurt, you haven't seen this person. And then you turn around and there they are. And what do? You ignore them. Don't look at them. Don't look at them. So you hurt the Lord and you hurt his feelings. He'll reciprocate. He'll reciprocate by ignoring you. He'll just because actually our original offense is we're ignoring him. We're ignoring him. Ignorance. The English language, I've mentioned this a few times recently. English language is weird. It's actually, what is the English language? I read an article recently about how it's estimated that at least 80% of the words in the lexicon that is called English are borrowed words. They come from another language. So ignorance, ignore, it comes from Latin. But then, you get the shift in pronunciation. Even we see that in English. The shift, the great vowel shifts. So that, practically speaking, people who speak English in some parts of England, in a dialect, they can't understand what somebody's saying from another part of England. I read an article once in a newspaper in England that explained that there was an East End criminal in East End of London. They talk like that and really quick, like that, like what are you saying? This East End criminal was extradited. He was in prison. He was extradited to Los Angeles to give evidence in a case there, and the judge, the Californian judge, had to bring in an interpreter to find out what's this guy saying. Are you speaking English? Yeah, he's speaking English, but anyway, you have a word like ignorance. We say ignorance, but it's just it's like an affectation. There's a long history to that, but the word is actually ignorance. So we talk about and that ants is another word ending comes into English from another language. I think it's in terms of the declension of the verb and the conjugation and so forth. The conjugation of the verb, the declension of the noun and the cases of it in Latin, which eventually leads back to Sanskrit, is ants is one of those endings. So ignorance is like perseverance. So ignorance is not just lack of knowledge. In essence, ignorance means don't want to know. Don't want to know. So because you don't want to know, then Krishna gives you forgetfulness. And that's what happens. If we maintain an offensive mentality, then eventually, knowingly or unknowingly, we are going to make offenses, and the Lord is aware of everything, so he's hurt by that. And underneath it all is actually ignoring the truth, ignoring the reality, the totality of reality. We have this truncated sense of what is real, the physical, but we've lost the sense of what is actually in the metaphysical world. We've forgotten Krishna. But as we say, you can't forget something you don't know. You can't remember something you don't know. If you don't know it, there's no question of remembrance and forgetfulness. So our ignorance is a misuse of our free will. So we have to, it's an act of will. We have to will ourselves to stop thinking bad about other people. And actually stop thinking bad about ourselves. Forget the past that sleeps, Bhaktivinoda says. We all come from abominable situations, conscious ones or unconscious ones, because we've been in this material world pursuing material desires since time immemorial. We're conditioned souls. And Prabhupada explains this whole world runs on envy. So we have to recognize this in ourselves. We have to recognize this is my condition. And it's just that. It's just a condition. It's not our nature. It's actually not our nature to do this. The material world is not our natural place. The material atmosphere is not our natural place. Envy is not our natural condition. that's time up. I always tend to go on too long. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Is there any more information? I forget the name of the prabhu that we started talking about, that Lord Chaitanya Prabhu.
Devananda Pandit.
Is there any more information about him?
Well, this whole story is elaborated in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, so far as I know. I'm not a very learned person in regard to these things. I haven't gone down that. You'd have to ask for exact details of where to go to and find this. You'd have to ask probably Banu Swami, somebody like that. But it's there in Chaitanya Bhagavat. This story of what happened that's what I'm saying. I said at the beginning, Krishnadas Kaviraj does a shorthand on certain things because he wants to elaborate other things. Actually, I heard that Jayapataka Maharaj is doing a compilation of all three into one book. So, yes.
Krishna, thank you for a lovely class. My question is, if you're feeling offended, and you said you went to a social thing and you ignore them as well, is that the proper behaviour as well?
No, that's what I ran out of time. No. Well, one of the things here is that Lord Chaitanya is talking also about unknowing offence. There's another great story about that, but we haven't got the time. So, but well, there's several ways these things can be dealt with. But once one becomes aware that one has committed offence, then one can apologise, or if one's pride doesn't allow one to do that, or for whatever reason the atmosphere is such that approaching that person, it might be that there was an all-out fight and whatever, and harsh things, that you need a bit of time to let it all cool down. But serving somebody prasadam, engaging in one of the loving exchanges, is the way around it, the way to resolve it.
I was thinking from the other side, if you feel that somebody's caused offence and how do you react?
Do you feel offended?
Yeah, well, yeah.
You're the one whose feelings are hurt. Well, if you want to be completely thoroughgoing about that, we need, well, this is deep stuff actually, because Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha, we have to